But to go through the rest of the agenda, I would like to give the floor to Carlos Tranjo, which many of you know is the person who is responsible for the day-to-day of Granular, and who will be introducing the speaker. So, Carla, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Serafin, for this introduction. And I think we started also to record the webinar, and we are jumping into these living labs in rural areas. So our first speaker is going to be Tristan Berchou. Tristan is the project coordinator of Granular. And today he's going to introduce us the project Granular, but also what is the role of living labs in these research activities. And then we'll jump into other experiences, as said earlier by Serafin. So without further ado, I give the floor to Tristan.
Thank you, Carla. Good morning, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here in this first event of the Knowledge Transfer Accelerator. Let me share my screen, and I will start my presentation. So I hope you can see it all good. Today I will present. Not yet.
Are you sharing? Yeah, we cannot see it.
Yeah, okay.
We cannot see it, but if you want, we can share on our side if you prefer.
Yes, because it looks like it's collapsing every time that I'm putting it.
No problem. Maybe Maite, you can share it.
Will you see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So today I wanted to talk to you about the project Granular as a main point of view. Do you have troubles hearing me, or is it okay?
Perfect. We can hear you well.
Okay. So I wanted to introduce the Granular project first from the perspective of why this project exists. And instead of going back to the start of the proposal, I decided to include the highlights from the high-level road policy forum that was held just a month ago, in which there are some key points that are very relevant to how the project is covering. One of the first things was the fact that we need to have transparent rule proofing at European and national levels. And this is something that the project is working on, but also to enhance granularity of data. And this is the core part of Granular, of the project, which is to generate data that is at the local level, but also at the European level. And to generate indicators that are relevant for policymakers at municipal levels. And this is also something that we are working on, and together with the Living Labs, and this is what I will introduce just later. And of course, to improve data collection. And this is part also of the capacity building activities of the project, and to support local actors to also collect data that is necessary to complement the data that is already existing from different research institutes and government. And all of these, so these are the core parts of the project. And of course, there is everything that is linked to policy planning that we are also working on in parallel with policy recommendations that will come and be the main output of the project. So next slide, please. In terms of the project, we have the main goal is to support the just digital economic and ecological transitions. But mostly what is important here to keep in mind is that we are working through integrated place-based evidence and multi-actor processes. How do we do that? Together with the Living Labs, we are conceptualizing the diversity of functionalities in rural areas, but also providing data to the local actors so they can actually put in place these transitions. And next slide. The main approach of the project. So we are reviewing literature, existing literature, former project outputs, but also policy document and existing data. And the core part of the project is to provide a conceptual framework that we call the rural compass, which is a compass to guide action in local areas on many different topics for integrated rural development. And in order to support that compass, we also generate data through new methods. We're exploring different type of methods, from web scraping to citizen science, crowdsourcing, the use of social media and Earth observation, in order to provide indicators that are relevant for policymakers locally and tools as well to help guide action. And all of these, so all of this generation of new knowledge is done jointly with the multi-actor laboratories, which include living labs. And the outputs from the project will be policy recommendations, but also new research advances and data sets and tools. Bear in mind that we are working only with reproducible data, so we will make our results open access and they will be reproducible. And in order to reach that, in the next slide, you have the consortium of the project. I will not cover all of the fantastic partners that we have, but just to also acknowledge here that the Living Labs, the approach that we took is that the Living Labs are completely part of the consortium as complete partners. And this was a choice from the start of the project to make sure that this is throughout the project, from the construction to the end and the delivery of the project, they are Living Labs as part of the whole consortium. And now, if I dig into the Living Lab, so we call in our approach, we are talking about multi-actor labs, which actually encompass two types of labs. We have 7 living labs and 9 what we call replication labs. So you can see the map of the different living labs and replication labs. The living labs, they are throughout the project. So for 4 years, they are working together with the rest of the teams in order to co-design, test, and validate the concept, data indicators, methods, and tools that the other part of the project are generating. And from the 3rd year, so at mid project, we are launching 9 replication labs that will basically use the outputs from the living labs in order to see how if it is possible to replicate data and the knowledge that has been generated to other parts of other contexts, other territories with different social political contexts, etc. So this approach was to make sure that we have some in-depth understanding with the living labs, but also we try to cover a larger area with replication labs to test and to make sure that this is relevant also in other contexts. And in the next slide, you can see that how we approach the living labs in the project is really to discuss rural diversity, to understand what is the concept of rural diversity in different territories, but mostly to propose indicators and recommendations that guide public action locally. So the living labs are working within their own policy cycle locally, and the idea that we have in this project is that the indicators that are generated will be used in policy making, or at least we will get this feedback loop to see the relevance of those indicators. We have a 4-step approach to put in place those labs. The first one is to start up the whole process, and I'm sure Marco will also explain that a bit more later, to understand what are the thematic priorities locally. This was not defined at the project level, of course, it's defined for each living lab, and to define, of course, the organization, the roles. Step 2 is to co-design, so that's the process to co-design the methods and the data that we will be generating and indicators. So for this, it's based on what the living labs are needing in terms of indicators for policy, for local policy. The third step is to implement this. So how do we collect data and how do we bring that forward and create this knowledge? And the fourth step is to synthesize all of this, to validate the data in order to see how replicable it is. And in the next slide, you can see that I've put here, so before I was just showing the role of living labs, now how we approached it with the other work packages. So as part of the startup, the other work packages provided a framework to see how we can characterize the living labs. And this was in parallel with at the living lab level to set up the whole process. So this was the first phase. Now we are in the co-design phase, where at the project level, from the research teams, we had a review of data and methods that are available. And we are also mapping the skills that we have in the consortium in order to build capacity for data collection. In the same time, the living labs have been identifying the priorities that they want to work on, defining an action plan, and to specify what are the indicator data needs that they have locally, but also capacity building needs. And now we are actually joining these two parts in order to actually plan the activities that are coming up. And then we'll be, of course, implementing this. So we will generate data from the research teams, developing the indicators and synthesizing all of this into policy recommendation. And this will feed into the living labs who will test, validate data, and as Serafin was saying, in real policy conditions, in order to identify levels of action. And yeah, just underneath you can see, if you click one more, there is some main contribution that we are expecting from and to the living labs. So it's to support the local needs, to contribute to new data for policymakers locally in order to help guiding action. So as the conclusion, if you can go to the next slide, the discussion that I wanted to just bring forward. There is a lot of opportunities from a research point of view to actually include living labs, but also from a policy perspective. Early on already to defining the policy agenda and synchronize it with the research agenda at the local level. That means defining together the priorities that living labs should work on. And this will be informed also by objective evidence. And I'm sure also the results from Sherpa will bring that into light. To have evidence will help to actually have fruitful discussion. And then to channel this evidence into decision making. So that's the second part that we can have living labs. And the last part is to co-design the monitoring and evaluation indicators to include living labs at this stage. And really quickly, just my final slide is some recommendations for this discussion and maybe to be able to discuss later. Overall, what we are, so we just finished our first year. We see that we need better evidence to move away from simplistic narratives for rural areas. We lack data. We do need data that is sensitive to rural diversities and specificities from rural areas. And for this, we need to have objective evidence. And this is the basis of living labs that are working well, is to have evidence that we can trust in order to have discussion that is non-subjective. And the third point that I wanted to make here is there are some challenges, and I'm sure we'll hear from some of the challenges. We have to talk about them. One of them from a research perspective and from a coordination perspective is to align and manage expectations. Research and practice sometimes have different timing, or very often have different timing, different priorities. What researchers want to push science for is not necessarily what the data is needed locally. So this is one big challenge, and that is also we are trying to overcome in our own project. For this, communication is key. And I think we can also take that to the discussion later. And the last challenge that we have is the whole idea of changing scale. To generalize from living labs sometimes can simplify too much, but if we cannot generalize, then the outputs will never be able to be taken aboard in terms of policy. So it's a big challenge to actually be able to generalize the outputs from different living labs and to make it in a very understandable while keeping all the diversity of situations into account. I'll stop here. Thank you very much for the time. I think I went a bit over, but sorry for that.
Thanks, Tristan. No problem for being a bit over. I think it was great to hear and have a bit of a framework of the Granular project, which I'm sure not everyone is familiar with. And also having an overview of how this project accounts for living labs. But today's discussion is exactly about that. Hearing the stories from Living Labs and Living Labs coordinator themselves. So without further ado, the next session is our two stories for two Living Labs, one from the Granular project and one from the Rustic project. So both Living Labs have started 1 year ago, meaning that they are an inception stage. And here, therefore, we want to really to highlight or bring experiences which have basically kicked off to hear on how they have set up their living labs, what are the challenges. So first speaker today is going to be Marco Ricci. So Marco Ricci is the coordinator of the Italian Living Lab of the Granular project, which is in Tuscany. So center of Italy. Marco, I leave you the floor for telling us a bit the story of how is your experience and what's working well, what is a bit more challenging. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Carla. Hello, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity of present briefly our living lab and our work. So I share my screen and my presentation. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it. You have to put it on presenter mode.
Yeah, I've done it. Okay, as Carla said, I'm Marco Ricci. I work with my society with the Distretto Rurale of Val di Cecina on Living Lab Val di Cecina in the Granular project context. So I briefly present our territory that is situated in Tuscany, central region of Italy in the west coast. And the territory of Val di Cecina means Cecina Valley. Cecina is a river and is a city situated in the coastal area of our territory. So the main characteristic is that this territory is divided in two main kind of land, kind of territory. One in the internal area is hilly and wooded, and one in the coastal area is plain and more urbanized, more with more presence of tourists. And so we have different territories, but with strong connection between them. So historical, cultural, economical, and infrastructural connection. So we have decided to keep together these two kind of territory and acting with data collection and political planning in the all take in mind all this territory. So the rural district of Val di Cecina was founded in 2019, so before the Granular project, by 12 municipalities, one union.
Sorry, Marco, for interrupting you. I think we still see the cover slides.
Oh, sorry, I'm going on.
Maybe you can reshare it. Yeah, now we are on slide 2. It's not full screen.
I'm going. Okay, yeah. Doesn't matter. You see in. I think you can see. If the presentation is a problem, I can go on with this mode. It's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So I was saying that the rural district was funded before the start of the GRANULAR project in the 2019, and by some municipalities of the area and some union of municipalities, agricultural trade association, general trade association, and other commercial partners. So there are represented more kind of many kind of partners, of stakeholders of the territory. This is so important for the acting well, for the political planning of our territories. So some main characteristic, for example, in the agri-food practices, we have a good presence of organic farming. More than 20% of our used land is already organic or in conversion. On the other hand, we have some problem, hydrological problem, lack of mobility services, lack of logistical services. So we have to take in account this main characteristic in our acting in the GRANULAR project. So we know our expectation from GRANULAR mainly is about development of data set for improving multifunctionality in agricultural enterprises, for example, and qualifying the tourist software. These of agricultural production and tourism activities are two main issues in our project. So improve the involvement of local stakeholder in the definition of useful data sets. This is very important because in the data sets used in the past are top-down data, not involvement about local stakeholder. And this is a problem we have identified in this first stage of our work. So the third objectives is to develop useful tools to improve the effectiveness of local governance action. This is another, of course, main problem, the effectiveness of local policies, because we need to see the effectiveness of the local policies and change the actual reality of and problems of our territories. I'm going faster with this. As I said, our main goal is to acquire useful tools to guide policies and strengthen the governance tools and cohesion among the members of the rural district. But in the first stage of the work, as Tristan said before, we have identified 3 thematic priorities, and the thematic priorities are organization of the food chain, tourism and its impacts, negative and positive impacts, environmental and economical, ecosystem services, in particular focus on the availability of water for some kinds of use of the water. And to identify it, we have done work together with the workshop and online meeting. And in this first stage of the project, in this first phase, we have some little problem that later I show you, and to work together and identify problems that with the point of view of all stakeholders, not just with the main stakeholder like municipality and big corporations. So this is our main objective in this phase, in this first phase of the project, to keep in mind all the point of view of all our stakeholders. So as I said, our goal to planning the future activities is to organize our work together. And it is not so easy because of the different kind of participant of our in our living lab. And our goal is to start with working groups and to as I said before, to identify the real nodal points of the territory criticalities, because this is very important to set the work on the dataset collection. And to do this, first of all, is necessary to analyze the priority identified from the point of view of each type of stakeholder. As I said, this is very important for us. And so I said you the 3 thematic priority we have identified: agri-food supply chain, water resource, and tourism. I briefly show you some main objective in these 3 priorities. In the case of agri-food supply chain, we want to encourage the socio-economical sustainability of the area, environmental sustainability, and enhancing the well-being and the healthcare. All these 3 objectives are related to the agri-food consumption and agri-food supply chain, local food, of course, supply chain. So we have many specific objectives for all of these main objectives. We want to work on in this granular project. About the water resources, the second main thematic priority, we have identified 3 main objectives, and the management of water resource in the agricultural use, in the potable water resource, and in the water resource for environmental objectives. So the thematic of the management of water in 3 main aspects, so relevant for our territory. And the third thematic priority is the tourism. As I said, is a very important economical issue in our territory, but it also has, of course, some impacts. Of course, positive impacts like economical income, but also environmental and social negative impacts. So we have to, we want to know more about it and to work on it in this project. So encourage, of course, in tourism in the other, and a better distribution in terms of times and space, to promote a greater valorization of the cultural and environmental heritage spread through the territory, and limit the negative economic and environmental impacts of the tourism. So, I'm going to end my presentation with the main difficulty. In this first year of work, as I said, the main difficulty encountered was to work together, and because the main aspect of our living lab, or I think of many living labs, is to have different types of local actor, agricultural companies, local authorities, trade association, research institution, and this is, of course, is a good thing to keep in mind all the different point of view, of course. But in the other hand, this is a problem to manage the work together, as I said. Organize meeting with different subjects with different work needs. Sometimes someone works in the morning, someone works all the day. Keep the different needs together and define priorities. For the agricultural companies, this is has some problem and needs some, and they have some priorities that are not the same priority of other partners. So keep together these different needs is not so easy, and it was the main problem in this first year of working together. And the third main problem is to make everyone understand their part of competence in this project and make them carry on the work. As Tristan said, Granular is not a simple project. It's ambitious and I think useful, but it's not simple. So to transfer to the all stakeholder the main objective, what we have to do and how we have to do it is not so easy, and we are working on it. But this problem leads to main problems, delay in works, for example, and different degree of participation between members of the Living Lab. So we are trying to face it. It's not easy, but we are working on simple solution, and at example identify a more active coordination group, and have multiple meetings at different times to let them possible to participate at different time in the day, and to set working groups on different priorities, because of course everyone is has more facility to participate if we are working on their priorities. So with this solution, we hope we can solve or face in a good way this problem. But the good thing, the good news is we notice in our Living Lab that there is a high level of awareness in the fact that it's not easy for us to do this work, but we have to give the rural areas a chance. So we have no other way than working on and try to finalize this project as well as possible. Thank you. I stop here.
Thanks a lot, Marco, for your presentation and testimonial from this Living Lab based in Italy. Now would we like to give the floor to Daria Els. So Daria, she's a research associate at the Federal Institute of Agricultural Economics, Rural and Mountainous Research in Austria. And she's also the coordinator of Rustic Living Labs in this mountainous setting. Rustic is a project that has Granular just started 1 year ago, and whose main objective is driving rural transition. But I will let Daria explain a little bit more on that, and also how, in your case, you have been defining the main thematic, the topic, but also the main challenges. And perhaps we'll see some similarities, and we'll have give some time then for a Q&A session to debate on that. So prepare your question. And I leave you the floor, Daria. I think Maite, she's going to share your presentation.
Yeah, good morning from my side. Thanks for having us. Yeah, I see the presentation. So yeah, I'm going to talk about our Living Lab experience so far from the Rustic project, from the Living Lab NOC region Oberkärnten, which is in Austria. And I am one part of the Living Lab coordinator team with 2 other colleagues, I think, who are also on the call today. Maybe next slide, please. Yeah, so just really briefly, what will Rustic achieve, or what is the overarching objective? As we've already heard, it's a sister project from Granular, so quite similar. And the overall objective is to enable rural communities, actors, policymakers to design better strategies, initiatives, and policies, and to foster sustainable transition of rural areas. This should be done by advancing our understanding of the different rural functionalities, characteristics, and transition scenarios. We do have 14 living labs from 12 European countries, and same as in Granular, there's a high emphasis on data in Rustic. Next slide, please. Yeah, so our pilot region is the NOC region Oberkärnten. It's located in the Central Alps in the southernmost province of Austria, which is called Carinthia. It includes 17 municipalities, and the total area is about 1,300 square kilometers, with a permanent settlement area comprising only about 15% of the entire area. The population of about 52,000 inhabitants has been continuously shrinking for the past years. The decline amounted to about 3.5% between 2011 and 21, but with considerable differences between those 70 municipalities. So the region does face some major challenges for the development, which are, for example, an unbalanced job structure, a strong deficit in job supply, high commuter rates, and the already mentioned negative demographic development, which is in particular outmigration of young people and women, but also an aging population. On the next slide, you can see some nice pictures of our region. Yeah, and you see like the natural features, they range from hilly mountainous areas to higher alpine mountain areas and land landscapes. Next slide, please. Yes. So with regard to governance, our region is quite well developed because our pilot region partner in Rustic is the regional agency of the NOC region. And the aim of the regional agency is to steer continuity and strategic development of the region. Besides focusing on socio-economic development, it also does promote activities and programs, for example, in climate change adaptation, which is quite important, is that they have established a strong regional network with many stakeholders from different sectors, and they did establish a lot of trust among those regional actors and also the population. Currently, the agency is launching a new so-called competence center, where the pilot region partner, together with other relevant regional stakeholders or actors, for example, from tourism, will have a joint office location. And then this competence center will serve as an anchor point or contact point for key actors. It will support the pooling of resources and the better use of synergies, and also prevent from, for example, double funding or dual approaches from different actors. And all actors who are involved there are committed to develop the region as a common living space and kind of put their sectoral goals in the background. So also in line with this, the region has established a new regional strategy or regional objective with the name Becoming the Best Working and Living Region. Currently, there's also a project going on to evaluate and test if this objective is reachable. And in essence, the objective is to address regional challenges in a very comprehensive way by involving all sectors and branches. And the pressure of lacking workforce and combined with the negative population forecast led to the belief of the pilot region partner that joint forces are needed to attract new inhabitants and returnees to the region, but also to encourage the locals to stay. And lastly, also 16 out of the 17 municipalities of the region are organized as a leader local action group. On the next slide, you can see what we have done so far in preparation for setting up our Rustic Living Lab, and these are some activities listed there. So we had several on-demand meetings with our pilot region partner, both online and in person. This allowed us for a good discussion on the Living Lab process, on updates, but also on coordinating planned activities. We had 2 focus group meetings to identify regional challenges. We did an observation during the just mentioned project on becoming the best working and living region. And we also had 2 consultants with external experts. And just recently in November, we have been in the NOC region to conduct 5 expert interviews with small rural business owners. And the primary objective of these were to capture the current state of small rural businesses in the region and their perceived challenges, and also to identify maybe areas that need more attention and support. Next slide, please. So then we needed to identify a regional challenge in the NOC region, which will be addressed by the Rustic Living Lab. And it was very important for us that this is in line with the regional strategy of becoming best working and living region. And also that it is not covered yet by other projects from the pilot region partner. As I just mentioned, they have been quite active in terms of regional development. So after discussions with the partner and also focus group discussions, 2 potential topics for the Living Lab Challenge have been developed or have emerged. And those were both tested out in the last month and to see or to check whether they were applicable for the Rustic Living Lab. And the first one was, as you see here, applying a quality of life index to the NOC region. The second approach was to establish a network of small rural businesses. Next slide, please. So the first idea for the Living Lab Challenge was apply a quality of life index to a region. And this approach did receive some considerable favor and interest coming from our pilot region partner. On the right-hand side, you can see the Aspen Territorial Quality of Life Index. And our idea was to develop something similar just for the NOC region. And this one does serve as a tool for measuring progress and territorial development. It does incorporate a comprehensive set of indicators which come from the personal, the socioeconomic, and also the ecological sphere. On the bottom part, you can see the indicators. And then an index value is calculated for each region coming from a set of indicators, which allows for a ranking or comparison of regions, as you can see in the map. This does offer some nice insights into various facets of the region's well-being, which would also, of course, be of great interest for this strategic objective of our pilot region partner. However, like drawing from the Aspen Quality of Life Index and also consulting with 2 experts in the field, led to the determination that applying a quality of life for the NOC region is unsuitable for the upcoming Living Lab. Maybe you can press enter shortly. Yes, so we identified some key issues and problems, which first included the problem of comparability with other regions. So the index values need to come from the same data set to allow comparison of regions. And the comparison for a quality of life index for the NOC region with the regions of the already calculated Aspen index would not be possible, as they have different indicators and data sets. Alternatively, we were thinking about we could have done a comparison of the individual municipalities within our region. But however, that would not really be appropriate because we don't want to rank the municipalities against each other, but more see the region as one entity. The next issue was the inapplicability of the Living Lab approach. Maybe you can go back again. Yeah, it's so the calculation of the index values come from existing data sets, and this would limit stakeholder involvement due to the constrained availability of regional data sets. So this means we could have given, like for the Living Lab participants, we could have given them a list from existing indicators we found data for, but this, however, is not really what a Living Lab intends to do. It's not, because the approach is more characterized by a dynamic or collaborative form of problem solving and engagement. And then very shortly, the last one was data gaps and capacity constraints. Some data gaps at regional level were observed, and also the index calculation demands quite some time and knowledge, which we were not able to provide from our team. So now the next slide. Yes. So this is why we concluded that our Living Lab will focus on the second concept of small rural businesses. So the main aim is to identify needs, challenges faced by small rural businesses in the region and establish a network to address them. Enter. yeah, this approach addresses an area which was not covered in previous projects. Also, the absence of representation for small rural businesses and regional strategies was identified as a problem during the focus group discussions. Particular the lack of knowledge about foundation and the takeover process. Furthermore, so far there's no representation planned of small rural businesses for the upcoming competence center. And another advantage is that we could leverage on the outcomes of this project on becoming best working and living region and building up on the results and findings. Enter, please. Yeah, so the primary objective of the Living Lab will be to pinpoint and address data gaps in regards to small rural businesses. This data will then enable us to map the current regional state. It will enable us to foster a more comprehensive understanding of the challenges faced by business owners. And very important that this data will serve to lay the groundwork for assessing and justifying the necessity of establishing a regional network and of the problems that those small rural businesses face. And then a future platform could potentially also function as a central hub where those challenges are addressed and some support is provided. Next slide, please. So, as I just mentioned, data is also very important in Rustic, and how can data help? So we want to gather a combination of quantitative data from statistical databases and qualitative data from the Living Lab discussion, expert interviews, and also surveys. And just very briefly, this data will then have the potential to, again, show the current regional state, facilitate the identification of specific needs, challenges, underscore the significance of this overlooked topic, form the basis for establishing a future platform, and provide recommendation for future actions and measures. Now, next slide, please. This is quite an important slide because it's our reflection of the Living Lab process so far on what went well and what was a bit challenging. So first, what went well, the advantage of having a strong pilot region partner with an already existing strong network of stakeholders and trust within the region was a significant asset when setting up a Living Lab, because they already knew many important regional stakeholders and they knew who of them were generally willing to participate and contribute in such a process. We did observe a lot of active participation and enthusiasm among the stakeholders. They showed eagerness to contribute to region development. And also we established a good communication between Living Lab coordinator and pilot region partner with some mutual trust, which led to a very supportive and fruitful culture of discussion and was quite from advance. On the other hand, however, a notable challenge arose due to the partners' active involvement in the regional development, which made it quite difficult to identify topics that have not been previously addressed. So we wanted to make sure not to duplicate other projects and that the findings can kind of be interwoven into the pre-existing project structures and allow for synergies. Also, there was a challenge of striking the balance between fulfilling the tasks and assignments of the Rustic project and at the same time ensuring practical benefits and outcomes for the region. And an additional challenge was that the structure or the Rustic framework with clear assignments, strict timelines, and task deadlines sometimes contradicted to the more dynamic nature or the complex realities of the Living Lab. Yeah, next slide, please. This is my last, very short. So what are our next steps? We will conduct some more expert interviews beginning of next year with some stakeholders with the objective to acquire more in-depth insights into the existing forms of supports and networks from small rural businesses. We will start initiating the data collection process, which will then serve for the current mapping of the region, and which will serve as a base for our living lab discussion. And also next year, the Rustic Cycle 2 starts for designing and preparing the living lab meeting, meaning that we will identify the relevant stakeholders and methods. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Daria. I see someone clapping also, and thanks for this presentation. So now we have a short question and answer session. So if you have any question, you can drop it in the chat, and we are going to read it. We have time for a couple of questions before proceeding with the next speakers. Perhaps I have a first one just for breaking a little bit the highs, and is both for Marco and for Daria. Is how have you recruited members for your living lab, and whether it was in fact difficult or easy to have them being part, and also, well, if they were aware of the concept of living lab, but how have you recruited them? And maybe we start from Marco and then go back to Daria.
Yes, okay, thank you. We, as I said, we have already done half of work of recruiting before, because we have already funded the district of rural areas of rural, the rural district of Val di Cecina. That's quite a living lab, quite similar to a living lab. But we, of course, we did a work of recruiting after the start of a granular project, and we act by meeting and working on the awareness of the project, and we fortunately find a good as I said, needs to participate on this work. It's not so easy, because we have to reach every partner in the rural areas. Not easy, as you know, but this work, it was not difficult as we thought, and this side of work, fortunately, was not so difficult. So of course we are still working on, because there are also many people, many stakeholders that doesn't know of this project and what we are doing. So we have to continuing to work on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Marco, and same question to you, Daria. Therefore, how have you recruited your members?
So as I kind of mentioned, for us it was quite from advantage that our pilot region partner was so strong already, and has done so much in terms of regional development, and they had already a really broad network of different kinds of stakeholders, and also the tasks for communicating with the stakeholders, but also inviting them to the meetings was actually carried out by our pilot region partners, because they possess like the deeper understanding of which individuals can be involved where, and where they can potentially contribute to stuff. This was extremely helpful for us. And then maybe because you just mentioned that if the participants were aware of the term living lab, we were always trying to translate it to a more German term, but also not the correctly German translation, but more like we were trying to explain it as a dynamic working group and a lot of involvement. So we actually didn't try to use the word living lab too much with them, but more like rephrasing it a little bit to make it a bit more easy to grasp.
Okay, thanks. I see a couple or two more questions on the chat. So first one, does the scale for the living labs impact on its effectiveness? So maybe we start with this and then we move to the next one. Does any of you want to try to answer on that?
Oh, I don't know, really. I want to say that we have we started 1 year from 1 year ago the work, and we still have to verify the effectiveness of the impact of our work. So maybe it could be an issue, but we want to work at local policies, at the level of the local policies. So we need to act on this scale. We can work on more little or bigger scale.
Daria would like to add something, or we have also another question about stakeholders.
Yeah, maybe I will go to the second question if it's okay. Like, what could you give some examples? Who are the experts that you interviewed? What kind of stakeholders? So yeah, in our case, we had some consultation with external experts. Those were people who worked with the Quality of Life Index, who also worked at the Aspen project, for example. And then in terms of expert interviews in the region from stakeholders, we try to involve stakeholders from small rural business owners from diverse branches and sectors. So, for example, we had a hotel owner, we had someone from agriculture, we had someone from consultancy, someone from an IT firm. I forgot the fifth one yet. But as I said, for our next step, we also want to include more expert interviews, maybe coming from a higher state, like not say small rural business owners, but maybe going for the Chamber of Agriculture or the Chamber of Economics, and get some insights there, what kind of supports for those people already exists. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Maybe just the last question quickly before proceeding, because we are a little bit behind time, is like who were the stakeholder that was the hardest to involve, and whether you will manage to involve policymakers. So.
For us, the hardest was sure the farmers, agricultural companies, specifically the smallest, because they have already all the problem of work of going on with their activities, and involve them in this kind of projects is very difficult. But we are working on it, so we hope to reach a good enough level of participant of this kind of stakeholder.
Yeah, maybe for us the time constraints on the jobs they carried out maybe also played a role. But again, here we were super lucky that the pilot region partner knew already who was like eager or had some time to kind of volunteer or take some free time for half an hour. So we did not have that many problems so far, but yeah, still our the real living lab process hasn't started yet. It's starting next year, so maybe we'll face some challenges there. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, thanks a lot to both. And I would say that we are going to proceed forward. I see that more questions are there, so I invite you to perhaps answer in the chat so that, well, we are not too late. And we introduce the next batch of speakers. So now we're going to talk about the Sherpa and Robust projects. So they are both projects, European funded projects that have established different living labs. And the Sherpa project just ended, while the Robust project ended since a longer time. So we discuss about more mature living labs, and here we'll talk about how to monitor and evaluate the 4D action of living labs, but also we'd like to hear about sustainability, if it has happened and how. So first speaker here with us today is Ellen Boulton from the Wageningen University, and she will present us the experience of the Sherpa project, which has established more than 40 multi-actor platforms so sort of living labs. Ellen, I give you the floor for telling us this very interesting, well, what you learn, in fact, from this project and how you have worked so far.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Let me share my screen. Yes, you should be seeing it in presentation mode now.
Perfect.
Yeah, so in Sherpa, we worked with multi-actor platforms, and I will talk a little bit about monitoring and evaluation. So what did we learn about how to run those platforms, and also about the longevity or the sustainability of the platforms. Yeah, there we go. So Sherpa, in a nutshell, just very shortly, the overall goal was to gather relevant knowledge and opinions that contribute to recommendations for future policies and research that is relevant to EU rural areas. And we did all that learning and gathering knowledge in multi-actor platforms. And the multi-actor platforms are basically interfaces where we connected science, society, and policy actors. So there was a rural dialogue between researchers, policymakers, people representing civil society, between citizens and business. And the idea was that there was a co-creation of knowledge and co-learning between all of those actors. So the multi-actor platforms are at the heart of the project. And then what was interesting about the Sherpa project is that we capitalized on existing research findings. So to learn about all the outcomes and results from other EU and other projects and try to capitalize on those to take that with us in those multi-actor platforms. And on the other hand, also, of course, to empower the key actors in public policy making. So it was very much focused on informing policy as well. So a quick overview of where we had these Sherpa multi-actor platforms. So there were 41 regional and national platforms. So some of in the Netherlands, for example, we had a national platform, but also regional ones. And each platform had a facilitator and a monitor who basically facilitated the project of the process of the multi-actor platforms. Well, then, like I said, there were actors from science, society, and policy in each of the multi-actor platforms, and they were engaged in different topics throughout the project. So we talked about the rural vision for the long-term vision for rural areas, but also more specific topics like climate change, for example. And all of that resulted in a shared knowledge base that is relevant for EU policy. And that's all available in the Sherpa repository. So to dive a little bit into the monitoring and evaluation that we did within Sherpa. So the central question was, how do you effectively design, support, run these multi-actor platforms? With the goal to engage science, society, and policy actors in a meaningful way in policy and in research agenda on rural development. Well, so that's a kind of a big question. How can we learn about it? So what we did is we organized cluster meetings. So the clusters were based on the topic that was discussed within the multi-actor platforms, and that was a very nice way of connecting different maps in different countries to exchange, to listen to each other, to talk about shared issues as well. Then we had a monitoring and evaluation tool, or more than one tool actually. They were document-based, where we tried to keep track of the process and the progress also in the multi-actor platforms. Then we had monitoring and evaluation calls, where we basically just called the facilitator and the monitor of each multi-actor platform and listened and reflected on what are your experiences. And in our experience, these calls were actually quite important, because if you call people directly, you often uncover a lot more detail of why things are working or not working. Well, and then out of all of those things we did, we learned a lot of lessons, and we analyzed those in monitoring and evaluation workshops. I will go a little bit quicker. So a quick overview of the Sherpa dynamics. So it starts with a constellation of the multi-actor platform, including those 3 actor groups. Then there's an agenda. What are we going to work on? And the input comes from the existing research findings in the form of a discussion paper. Then, of course, there's a dialogue about what does that input mean for our multi-actor platform. And from that discussion or that dialogue comes an output that is a map position paper. And then there's a follow-up, and then you can, of course, go through the cycle again. And it's now presented in a way that it's all you go from one step to the next, but in reality, of course, sometimes you go a bit back and forth. And all the lessons that we learned about this whole process is available in a deliverable about, well, basically all the findings of the monitoring and evaluation that we did. Well, now I'm just going to focus in on 2 steps in that process. So first on the constellation. So this is about a balanced science-society policy interface. So it's about identifying, understanding, translating, explaining, but also about defining objectives and inviting people. Also based on benefits and roles, and there was a lot of effort put into inviting the right people for the multi-actor platform. And just now we also talked in the discussion about the balance of who do you invite and can you get people involved. And we learned that it's not about numbers, right? It's also not fixed. So sometimes, for example, there were a lot of civil actors in the multi-actor platforms, and then we talked to the platforms, and they said, yeah, basically there's a very wide variety of needs, and there's a lot of different people that represent different needs. So it's not about having exact balanced numbers, but more about finding a diverse representation. So one of just to share a quote from the monitor of a map in Portugal. A regional approach was considered crucial for correct rural policy making, research and stakeholder involvement in the issue of climate change. So that's just to show that, the balance in the science society policy actors, is important, but also it's not all about numbers. So this was about constellation. Then some lessons learned about the dialogue. So basically that's the heart of what is happening in Living Labs and in the multi-actor platform as well. Here we learned that, and I think this is the case always, that it's very important to have a common goal and also to have trust. But facilitation is very important. So there somebody who can design nice meetings, but also has soft skills and can deal with conflict, for example, as well. And then the dialogue in itself, you can see it as an intervention as well, because it has a lot of power or value that you can empower people and also further develop capacity of people within the Living Lab or the multi-actor platform. So those are lessons learned from constellation and dialogue. Well, this is just, it's a bit of a busy slide, but there's some lessons about rural dialogue, about connectivity, about policy, and about action. Those are the 4 things that we in the end identified as important and things that you should pay attention to. And in the middle of that, we placed capacity building as well, sort of a central point of attention. And I think I'm running a little bit out of time, so I will quickly wrap up and share some final reflections on ourselves. So there was a really key role for these qualified facilitators and monitors. So we learned that it was really important that we appointed those people within the project. On the one hand, it was very good to have a clear and objective common objective, but on the other hand, it's also good if people can experiment a bit and people can within their own living lab or multi-active platform, if you can, well, look at your own context and say we are going to do it a bit different maybe from other platforms in the project. We used a dynamic learning agenda, which was very helpful in creating spaces for learning. So it's about gathering learning questions and then seeing what do we learn about that. And now I want to say a final thing about longevity or sustainability of existing platforms or platforms that you build within a project. So we learned that you need to give attention to it, well, not right at the end of the project, but also start thinking about it a bit before, and to see if you can embed a platform or a living lab in existing structures. So are there other projects or initiatives locally or nationally that you can connect your living lab or your platform to? Because that just makes the chances of a platform basically surviving beyond the project a lot bigger than if you kind of place them on their own. Yeah, and I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for having me and for letting me share some of the lessons learned within Sherpa.
Thanks a lot, Ellen, for this wonderful presentation. I mean, I think what is striking us from Sherpa is his ability to align or to have this kind of serendipity and works like giving room for experimentation. So it's definitely a good practice, and thanks for sharing your reflections. Next speaker is also from another European project which ended a couple of years ago. So it's the Robust project, and Marina Klinke. She's expert on science society collaborations, and she has been working on the development of the 11 living labs in the Robust project. So she will tell us a little bit more on that, and also considering that some time passed since then. So yeah, I think we have more mature reflection also on that side. I leave you the floor.
Good morning, all. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, and yeah, I'll try to share my slides. Can you see it?
Not full
No.
notes. Yeah, yes.
No, and no notes, right?
No notes. Perfect.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Yeah. So good morning, everyone. Once again, I'll try to be on time. Yeah, it was really interesting to listen to the experiences of other projects, and yeah, I'm honored to talk today about Robust. I've seen some colleagues from Robust already. That's really amazing. So I'm working as a postdoc researcher at the Konrad Lorenz Institute, but I was at the University of Pisa during the project, and yeah, working with transdisciplinary approaches and living labs. And I'd like to tell that Robust is quite a unique project, focusing on rural-urban dynamics. As far as I know, it was at the time of the project also already quite unique, and even after, there are not too many projects focusing precisely on this, on linkages between rural and urban. So I will talk about some lessons learned, some success factors derived empirically, also implications for planning and managing these projects, and maybe mention something that also I personally can connect to after listening to the other presentations. Yeah, and some of the robust colleagues might recognize themselves on this nice photo from Riga. So yeah, briefly a bit about the project. So we had 11 living labs. They were diverse in geographic, social, cultural, economic, and political contexts, also in terms of rural-urban dynamics. You can imagine seeing this 11. The overall goal of Robust was, well, to better understand interactions and interdependencies between rural, peri-urban, and urban areas, and to identify and support policies, governance models, practices that could foster mutually beneficial relations. And as you mentioned already, so it was running, it ended 2 years ago. So it was running for 4.5 years between June 2017 and end of November 21. And my colleagues and I were still, yeah, in this reflection kind of process about what happened, what kind of processes there were, and what kind of yeah, outcomes we have. So just briefly about my role, I was an accompanying researcher responsible for designing and implementing a task dedicated to monitoring of joint work in these 11 living labs. This task was embedded in work package 3 that was focused on living labs more generally, and I did this work together with my wonderful colleagues from University of Gloucestershire. I've seen at least one today who is here on the call. Yeah, and so there were 11 living labs, but 3 of them were studied more in depth. These were so Tukum's lab, that they were focusing on developing a cultural strategy for the municipality. Then province, so the Lucca Living Lab, that was in the province of Lucca. The Living Lab team was focusing on a local food policy, developing a local food policy and territorial plan to reduce urban sprawl. They also intended to valorize cultural heritage, landscape, and territory. And the third in-depth case study was Gloucestershire Living Lab. So the team wanted to assess the potential and feasibility of circular economy and natural capital growth models and their potential to improve rural-urban linkages. So just to also give you an idea of the Living Lab phases and the framework that we had in place. So there were 4 phases: envisioning, experimenting, experiencing, and analyzing. And there was also, they were building on one another. And as Ellen already mentioned, it was similar for us. So of course, they were not very clear cut. So in reality, it's a bit messy. And also different living labs, they had, yeah, their phases were ending and next one was starting at different times sometimes. And there was a cross-cutting phase that was, yeah, monitoring. I wanted to emphasize self-evaluating, because we were not evaluating the work in living labs and the processes and the goals that living labs tried to achieve. So we were just designing and running this process so partners could share their perceptions, yeah, and could evaluate their work themselves. Yeah, and we also encourage teams to reflect on the work progress, their collaborative experiences, and we also encourage them to adjust their experimental work as the work emerged, unfolded. Each Living Lab team also had a research and innovation agenda, so it's probably a bit similar to what Ellen mentioned in Sherpa. So it was like, it was changing throughout the project, and teams were really also encouraged to adapt it as the work progresses. We used the multi-method approach to implement this framework. It included 3 semi-quantitative online surveys at regular intervals during the project. We had also longitudinal data analysis based on these surveys. We had interviews of different depths with all 11 living labs, and with these 3 more in-depth case studies. We had reflexive workshops, participant observation, triangulation techniques. Yeah, so it was quite a complex methodological and multi-method kind of framework. If any of you is interested to know more about really the methodological part, this is the paper that was published a few years ago, where we describe how it was designed and set up.
and what were the first results. And this is the synthesis report, where you can also find out a lot more about the project, not only about monitoring and evaluation, but in general about the outcomes of these different living labs. And this is just to give you an example from this longitudinal analysis. This was a question on collaboration. You can see that this graph shows that living labs started also from different initial points, and their evolution, their emergence was really also different. So we were thinking, this is just one of several on longitudinal development. We were thinking, what are the key success factors? What contributes to this different evolvement? So these factors that I will talk in a few seconds about. They are mainly based on the results of the 3 case studies, but also some factors are relevant to all living labs more generally. They are totally context dependent. So some of them are, one of them is capitalizing on resources, so individual resources of individual partners, research partners, for example, and practice partners, but also on their living lab kind of work together. Stakeholder engagement on the ground, where the work is happening in the living labs. Aligning project work with local dynamics, that was really important, and other speakers also mentioned that. Institutional support, sometimes it was really a lot about practice partner institutions, but it can be both, also research partners like universities involved in this work. Partners flexibility, both research and practice, and adaptive management in this living lab work, because this is really important, but that was also sometimes very difficult. Because the plan that you had in the beginning might change tremendously because of how the work evolves. Some questions are not interesting anymore, not relevant, because some political developments and societal developments happen in a certain region. So you have to adjust, but that was not easy. Co-leadership and co-decision making also played a role. Safe space, what I mean by safe space is actually quite many things. It's possibility to voice opinions and concerns freely. It's about mutual respect. It's about accepting that partners are different, that they have different perspectives, they have different priorities, needs, methods to work, different schedules. Also, some of these things were already mentioned by previous speakers. It's also about acknowledging and valuing the expertise of specific individual partners in this joint work. Open discussion, knowledge sharing, active listening, I think Ellen also mentioned that, and trust, that was mentioned already several times. Also aligning interests and priorities between research and practice partners. Clarifying partners' roles early in the project, that was also really mattered in some living labs and contributed to how work was evolving. And setting feasible goals, because projects are of course limited, they are only 4 or 5 years, and you have to somehow make realistic plans. And related to sustaining this living lab work after project ends. So a couple of things that were important in our case, in case of Robust, it was whether there was a good fit between research and practice partners in terms of their interests, in terms of maybe capacity, skills they have, in terms of the networks they have. And also, of course, acquiring subsequent funding to pick up the work that was done in Robust in another project, whether it's regional, national, or another European project. So that is really still a big problem, but sometimes it happens. So some of the success factors related to sustaining living lab work, they are capitalizing on joint resources and having institutional support, aligning interests and priorities, and aligning project work with local dynamics. So looking back more generally, So some of the lessons learned are related to learning. Mutual learning was still quite underrated in the project, but central for the success. So it's really important to foster this kind of learning and reflexivity as the project goes on. And learning does not naturally evolve from the coexistence of these different practices and perspectives. It really needs to be intentionally and continuously fostered in this process. Partners were also struggling with experimentation, both research and practice partners. And in some cases, we noticed also this risk-aversive attitude, which is also understandable, also depending on specific issues that were dealt with in particular living labs. So that is still something to pay attention to in next projects, how to actually design and carry out this experimental work. Researchers in particular struggled with their role in living labs, and this is the question also about a question about capacity building, both for research and practice partners, but researchers in Robust were really sometimes lost between their roles, whether they are researchers, whether they are facilitators, whether they are change agents. Who were they? We had these discussions multiple times in different living labs. So safe space that I mentioned just in the previous slide is one of the success factors. It really makes a difference. In the project, it was quite underappreciated and not practiced systematically. And in those living labs where the safe space was established and practiced, they were doing actually much better, at least in terms of collaboration, but that was immediately connected also to their to achieving their goals, to their joint work. There was power dynamics observed, so there were in some cases dominant individuals in living labs, and also some very big established institutions. And to manage this, I will talk about it briefly. Professional facilitation is really important to balance it. And the question, the last point here is impact. Of course, it's a very known issue, so it's problematic to measure, and in some cases it might lead to partners' frustration, especially for practice partners. So I will just mention implications for planning research projects with living labs first, and then implications for managing them. So what we learned is that connecting planned project work with specific local needs is essential, but this is something I'm sure that each of you already knows from your own experiences. And also balancing the needs of different partners and getting everyone on board was really fundamental. And living labs are not neutral. As we know, there is a political dimension to it, and ensuring institutional and sometimes political support is really important. Introducing a preparatory project phase, because it takes really time for work to really begin, and for some outputs and outcomes to kick in. So this preparatory project phase could really be used more for getting to know each other, for team building, for clarifying and aligning the needs, and developing really joint vision of the planned work. This process really takes time, and in some cases we were also we were told that it took this envisioning phase took really way too much time, and a lot more than originally planned. Communicating goals and functioning of joint work properly to partners was really important, because in some cases we noticed that not only communication within the living lab, but also outside it. So to get some support, it's connected to this point of getting, for example, institutional support. That was sometimes partners reflected that was not done sufficiently or in the right way, and they were thinking that, well, next time in a similar project they would do it differently. They would really ensure that they communicate the project, what is happening in the project, what living labs are, how they function, what the challenges might be in a much better way. It's very important to remember that there should be flexibility in work planning and time schedules, as I already mentioned. The work is emerging, and there needs to be room for that, room for this adjustment, and time schedules in the project. The one originally planned can be too inflexible, and this is just something to bear in mind, and maybe to be more relaxed about, that this is how it's supposed to go. This is the way. And plan dedicated tasks to support this adaptive management is really important to embed it already in the project design. Implications for managing research projects. So implement reflexive activity, it's an absolute must. Adopt adaptive management practices, because of this emergent nature of living lab work. Someone from Daria from Rustic, she mentioned that there was also a difficulty between balancing delivering on the project and also ensuring practical benefits for the region. So this is kind of a balancing act all the time. So there are some similarities. Ensure professional facilitation. I already mentioned in Robust there was, compared to Sherpa, there was no professional facilitation really planned in the project. And we feel that that was needed at the Living Lab level. Appreciating soft outcomes, not only producing tools and data sets, but also capacity building, for example, and network development. And considering long-term perspective is also really important. Capitalizing on available resources, such as relationships, networks, and competencies already available, and working towards lasting impact and, again, capacity development for both research and practice partners. That is it. Thank you. I know I'm a bit over, maybe not a bit.
Thanks, Marina. Thanks a lot. Yeah, we were anyway a little behind schedule also with the rest of the speaker, but I think it was very interesting to see so many common points across presentations. So that's definitely something interesting, but also some differences. And well, we'll go towards the next speaker, and maybe we'll have still a few time for some question and answer. So we are very, very glad to have here with us Giulia Campodonico, who is speaking from the European Network of Living Labs. So this is a network which counts several living labs across Europe, but also behind Europe, if I'm not mistaken, and has a task force on living labs in rural areas. So we are very glad to have you here to tell us a bit more about your network and how you see how your living labs are in fact acting, what are tips and tricks behind European projects, because your living labs are not just enjoying, let's say, European funds, well, enjoying but using, but more so we are very happy to have you here. I can leave you the floor.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all see the slides. I'm really glad to have the chance to be virtually with you all today. And I'm Giulia Campodonico. I'm the head of projects at ENOL. And I'm actually stepping in for my colleague, Jolinda Cavallo, who's the expert on rural and agriculture. So I'll do my best. And the idea is really to present an overview of the rural living lab stemming from the examples and experience of ENOL members. But what is ENOL? And ENOL is the European Network of Certified Living Labs. It has been founded in 2006 under the EU presidency of Finland, and our goal is to promote the living lab concept, influence policies, and enhance the living labs and enable their implementation at global level. And you see global, you see a world map, and indeed, despite the name, ENOL has grown from its foundation to an international network. And now we can count more than 160 members across 5 continents and 35 countries. And in the past, we have certified more than 600 living labs. And what we do is we facilitate the knowledge exchange, joint action, and project partnership among all our members. And besides this can happen in the activities we provide to members, but also through the different activities, including projects. You see some of the rural-related projects, in particular in the already prep soil, nations, and soil. So we're really active in the mission soil at the moment. But we have 20+ projects where we really focus on supporting the living labs. And while I know you've been talking about living labs the entire the previous hour, I think that it's important to highlight the definition of NO, because we know there is different approaches, different definitions that have been produced over the years, but NO has a specific definition that defines living lab as a open innovation ecosystem is in real life environments based on a systematic user co-creation approach that integrates research and innovation activities in communities, placing the citizens or the users at the center of the innovation. So we see that we really identify 6 common elements that all our members have and all the living labs have to be able to be certified, from co-creation, orchestration, multi-stakeholder participation, active user involvement, real-life settings, multi-method approach, and in particular, basing and ensuring to operating as an intermediary among the quadruple helix, so the academia, government, citizens, and industry. And here, a very brief overview of what our members are and what they do. So since our creation, living labs at the time were still working mainly on ICT, health sectors, but then they grew and expanded. And now you see on the left-hand side, the multiple areas of the work that our living lab focus on. And unfortunately, the arrow moved, sorry for that. But the rural areas, you see 38 members working on rural areas, 34 working on agriculture and agri-food. So these areas are the ones is updated until September this year, and it's really growing, and we see a growth in all the different sectors. On the right-hand side, what is also important to notice is the services that our living labs offer, and this is at the basis of the value proposition of our members, the services they can provide to their local ecosystems, and also in terms of the long-term sustainability of the living labs, because these are the services they can sell to the different actors of their ecosystem. But going back a bit to Enol, what we do, we said we want to empower living labs, and that's exactly what we are trying to do, is with a vision of being the leading organization empowering the global development of living labs, we offer a concrete path to grow to living labs from the different services and activities. And among these, we start with the certification and labeling. So Enol is the sole authorized organization that can certify living labs, that can certify the appropriate use of the living lab methodology, the appropriate long-term vision, the appropriate sustainability and governance setup that has been considered. And that's why in the past we have certified more than 600 living labs. But to do that, we also offer a capacity building program that is tailored either for applicant living labs that wants to be certified, but also for any professional interested in knowing more, to collaborate more with the living labs, and also for the living labs who are already certified to continue growing and continue expand their living labs. And among the other activities we offer in this path to grow are the working groups, which are knowledge exchange and collaboration on hot topics. And these are created and managed by our members. So it's not us imposing as centrally, but it's really the living labs identifying key areas and key topics. And as you can see, one, and as Carla mentioned originally, we have one on agri-food, agriculture and rural living labs, bringing together also them structured in sub-working groups as well. And everyone is free to join because indeed they are open to all our members. And here you have a QR code if in case you are interested. But what are living labs? And I know you talked about living labs, we said the definition, but despite their overuse and sometimes abuse of the term living lab, one of the questions we are asked more and more is who are the stakeholders and who needs to be active in actively engaged in a living lab. So of course we start with researchers. Then we start considering a soil advisor, rural land advisors, and the farmers. But is this a living lab? No, this is not a living lab yet. We then consider cultivation experts. We then need to engage the existing and new technology, but this is not over yet because there is an entire value chain that is missing, the supplier, the retailers, the customers. All this we need to consider. The living lab needs really to consider the entire value chain, and they don't need to go to the value chain only for the validation. We need to make sure that the quadruple helix and the value chain is really engaged in the living lab governance since the very beginning. And this means that setting up a living lab is not that easy as it may seem. It's not something that happens from one day to the other. And there's also many pitfalls and challenges that can be encountered. And some of these can be either focused on the theoretical and methodological, governance, actors' motivations, ethical challenges. And some of the most common we can identify are the lack of predetermined objectives and long-term ones, assuring the financial sustainability, ensuring a stakeholder engagement, and the prevalence of some users over the others. Here, just an overview of why the living lab. So if it's so difficult, why? Well, why? Because without going into details of the slides that you can read, real living labs offer real-life environment for co-creating solutions. So a faster innovation cycle that meets the needs of the final users, the recent innovation, while driving also societal impact, but only if all the different steps are done properly. And that's why when setting up a rural living lab, for example, it's determinant to adapt the living lab framework to the rural context. As you can see, you saw before, we have living labs in different sectors. And it's really important that all of them start from a harmonized approach on the living labs, that it's the one we certify, but then adapt to the context. And in this case, and as shown in the image, there are key components that shape the rural living lab framework, meaning the rural context and the physical conditions, the governance and control, including the methods for engagement and business model, the quintuple helix, and the digitalization. So for the rural context, in the rural areas, successful innovation depends on the government support and initiatives by the local community. So understanding and creating environments that facilitate the coordination of innovation activities is crucial in this context. For what concerns the digitalization, introducing digitalization rural areas also means assuring that inclusion and access to societal services. So this is why it's a component, it's a key component that refers, but also that is complicated and needs to be to perform alongside also with the infrastructure and availability. For the governance, well, sustainability is vital for all living labs, and it's necessary to a business model that really has a long-term vision and not only the specific activity, and that generate values for all its stakeholders that we saw before, because only when we have the full buy-in of all the actors, then it's easy and we have a sustainability for the long term. So governance should not only control activities, but also promote knowledge sharing and engagement with the rural residents in digital innovation process. And for what concerns the quintuple helix, well, this is an extension of the quadruple helix I mentioned before, introducing a fifth helix focused on the natural environment of society. And this is really bonding the natural environment and the living system. And this is a main factor that has been highlighted by all our members and also by literacy, in especially in the rural innovation process. there are also many barriers and impact, and the common ones are mainly related to economic, business, and societal conditions, the lack of innovative culture, heterogeneity in policies, cultures, working methods, and so on. But nonetheless, rural living labs play a pivotal role in the local context. And as you can see on the right-hand side of this table, is not focusing only on the barriers, but also the impact that living lab have within the communities and that can be used to overcome the barriers. So in highlighting that increasing the attractiveness of rural environments, new jobs, innovation with the community. And this is really important, that all the barriers are also presented as possibilities. How do we say that? Well, we do say this because this is exactly the knowledge exchange we have within our members and within our working group that face the same difficulties. And in particular, who are our members? One example is the Dingle Peninsula, from Ireland. And in this case, the reason why the Living Lab has been created was to face challenges as low-paid employment and young people leaving the area, access and development of future technologies. And so the Living Lab was really set up to create an ecosystem that could support more diverse long-term sustainable incomes in the area within the areas of agriculture, tourism, and energy. And now the Dingle Peninsula Living Lab is having a really strong impact on the community as a deep relationship trust, promoting discussion with individuals about the barriers, a lot of voluntary support, and with a community that is really willing to participate, provide feedback and helping with the co-designs, and policymakers that are invited to learn the impact of the activities implemented. Another example is Guadalinfo in Spain. And in this case, the community of the south of Spain face several challenges as larger rural cities that are risking social exclusion, low employability, lack of digital literacy, and lack of innovative culture and citizen participation. And with the goal of empowering people using ICT as a tool and to be driving force behind the transformation of these rural communities, the Living Lab of Guadalinfo is bringing a lot of impact, such as actively collaboration with towards the needs of citizens, a significant initiative involving the collaboration with Father-Mother Association to bring robotics and IT related activities since children aged from 10 onwards, and a mentor designated to within the Living Lab to offer assistance. But how can this Living Lab support? And so we know that sustainability is an issue, and that's why we have in Anol, we are continuing to see how to support our members, and we have created this platform, the Axel App platform, that is dedicated towards the scaling up of innovative solutions. And what we do here is really bridging the gap between the Living Lab innovators and services. So we're really offering the Living Labs as a research infrastructure. And besides Horizon Europe project, this is one of the examples of how a Living Lab can be sustainable. So they can offer services. Here, an innovator can access the platform. You will find here the links, or I can share it later better, but can access the platform and offer and say, okay, I want to test my solution in a real life environment. And here the Living Labs can offer themselves to sell their infrastructure. And this is a way to ensure the sustainability. I'm not sure if I stayed in time and answered all your questions, but if available for more. Here you have the contacts in particular of Dolinda, who's really sorry not to be here today.
Thanks a lot, Julia, for this amazing presentation, for contextualizing also the specific challenges and impacts of rural living labs. I think it was great, and we'll all dive a little bit more in depth to look a bit more on that. So we have few minutes just for a few questions, if any, that you can drop on the chat. Maybe I just have a question also to. Well, I see someone from the audience, so I leave the floor, Paula. Or you can drop it in the chat if you want. So meantime, I make a question to Marina about the sustainability of living labs in your project. Have you seen someone continuing after all and still like in place from the ones that you had established or have to establish?
Hi, yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, actually, Daniel Keach is also here. I hope he's still here. Gloucestershire Living Lab is one of those examples. As far as I remember, they got a follow-up project like Granular after Sherpa. As far as I understand, this is similar, but it's EU project. And as far as I know, in Gloucestershire case, it's a national British project, where they continue the work that they started in Robust. Otherwise, I know that in some cases it's more, it's less formalized, but some partners continue working together. Maybe they do not have funding, but they have some sort of interaction, and because of regional, I don't know, certain collaborations going on, they still continue working together without any funding. So, but funding is actually one of the biggest issues. Yeah, if you do manage to acquire it, you can really continue, and yeah, there will be a legacy for this work. But
thanks,
as Ellen
Marina.
mentioned, I can just one second. As Ellen mentioned, I think establishing a living lab in existing structures is probably one of the best ways that you don't start from scratch. So if that's possible. And I know that in some multi-actor platforms in Sherpa, it was done that you even marked it in the project. Ellen, as far as I remember, that this is existing, built on the existing structures. This is totally new. So maybe that's something to consider too. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, it's also
Marina,
maybe just one small thing to add, that it's also, of course, it takes a lot less time to establish if you have an existing structure already.
Julia?
But if I can step in, it's also sometimes hard to overcome the bias when you already have a structure, then starting from scratch. So it's true, it's less time consuming, but sometimes it's harder to really open the eyes to the real full set. As I was saying before, with the slides with the popping up image, that's really to help people saying, go beyond, really think of the stakeholders. And one thing I didn't probably highlighted enough is really long-term sustainability is a key component in the ENOL certification, and that's exactly why we're aiming and pushing for this. Is that we see too many living labs that are disappearing. They get funded and that's it. And after the funding, 1 or 2 years, they disappear. And that's because the governance and the business models have been focused only on the activity for which they have been financed for. So sometimes, and that's my general recommendation, is really go beyond this. Do not focus on the activity. Have the bigger picture in terms of the long-term sustainability, and think which services, which actors can, and what you can do. And despite being sometimes against what we say, is that we don't necessarily need to create living labs everywhere. Sometimes if something is already there, then try to make use of the living labs that exist already. So we don't want to over create living labs, but it's important to take advantage of what is already there also.
Thanks, Julia. I see we have also a question in the chat. I'm gonna drop it, even we are a little bit behind the midday, and maybe you have time to, any of you, to get the feedback on that. Is when Living Labs deals with already established territorial networks, organization, association, etc., Did you see any criticism in the alignment between the Living Labs participatory approach and the medium long-term strategy that established entities have already set up, so before the Living Labs? I don't know if any of you would like to intervene.
Well, this is this is not only happening in where an established condition is, so it's a bit different than what we were saying, Marina was mentioning before. This is a difficulty you have in every environment, because every environment, every user is there and willing to have its agenda. So they have, sometimes it's a fixed strategy, sometimes it's a mental agenda, interest. Every actor has its own agenda. So the role of the Living Lab is really to find the necessary mediation techniques to ensure none of these agenda prevails the other, that all of them, it's really negotiations and mediation to ensure that a common approach is identified with gives and takes sometimes. All the actors needs to be there, but they needs to be sure that they all commit and agree. So this is the hardest part, and that's why we say it's not something you can do in a day. It needs a lot of, and also it's important to have actors that have these skills in the Living Lab, but also that know the context. You cannot only have an actor that knows the rural aspect, or you cannot have an actor that only knows the mediation and social engagement aspect. You need really to have professionals that mix both expertise, especially talking in this case about the rural environment.
I just want to say that this last point of these dedicated people who have the knowledge and the skills is what we found in Sherpa as well. So we had this facilitator and monitor, which is, you know, they had their own learning process, of course, but they were also very important in if you want to actually get things off the ground. Those sort of soft skills are then super important. Carla, I'm sorry, but I really have to leave. So I just want to thank you for having me again. And if there's any specific questions, of course, please just send them my way, and then I will get back to you.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks to you all. We'll collect the remaining questions. So maybe participants, if you have, we'll ask you to send us questions so that we can then link it with speakers. So thanks to all speakers to be here today. Very happy. And thanks to you to be here listening for us as well. We'll be sharing presentations and we'll collect any formal question, and we'll keep you informed also about future activities from this knowledge transfer. So I hope you will have a rest of the a rest of the day, a good rest of the day, and thank you all for being here.